There is a moment that happens inside companies when a voice AI goes live. Someone senior, a manager, a director, sometimes a C-level, listens to the first call handled by the agent. And their instinct is immediate discomfort. Not because the agent failed, not because the caller complained, but because the voice doesn't sound like them. It doesn't carry the warmth, the authority, the human texture they associate with their brand. That discomfort becomes a decision point. And how leadership responds to that moment reveals something much more important than their opinion of the technology. Before I go further, what you're watching right now is an AI avatar, a digital version of me, Ronald. I built this deliberately because AI is part of how I work every day. I run Data Wonder, a company that builds AI automation and voice agent systems for real businesses, insurance companies, accounting firms, and medical clinics. Organizations where the volume of routine communication is enormous and where every hour of human attention is expensive. This channel exists because most AI content doesn't come from that perspective. We don't do tutorials here. We don't cover headlines. We talk about what actually happens inside companies when AI gets deployed, the decisions, the dynamics, and the effects that most people don't see coming. If that's the kind of analysis you're looking for, consider subscribing. There's no hype here, just observation. Now back to that moment of discomfort. What's actually happening in that room is not a quality assessment. It's a confrontation with identity. The executive listening to that voice call isn't evaluating the agent's performance. They're evaluating how the agent represents them. And that is a fundamentally different problem. For decades, the way a business communicated with clients was inseparable from the people doing the communicating. The voice on the phone, the tone in the email, the personality in the room. These were expressions of leadership. They were the brand. And the assumption, rarely articulated but deeply held, was that presence required a person. Voice AI challenges that assumption at the root. When a voice agent answers a call on behalf of an insurance firm, it's not just handling an inquiry, it's occupying a space that leadership previously controlled through people. And that shift creates a question most organizations aren't prepared to answer. What does executive presence actually mean when there's no executive in the room? This is where companies split into two groups. The first group responds to the discomfort by trying to make the AI sound more human. They spend cycles on tone calibration, on scripting natural-sounding hesitations, on choosing a voice that passes for a person. The goal is seamlessness. The goal is to make the AI invisible. The second group asks a different question. They ask, what should this agent be communicating, and to whom, and why, and how do we design that intentionally? The second group builds something durable. The first group builds something that breaks the first time the agent encounters a call it wasn't scripted for. I see this pattern constantly, and the difference between these two groups has nothing to do with budget or technical sophistication or even AI maturity. It has to do with clarity of identity. Companies that know what they stand for operationally, not just in a mission statement, can translate that into a voice agent system. Companies that don't know or disagree internally end up with an agent that pleases no one. If you're finding this useful, a like helps the channel reach people who think this way. Now here's where it gets more complicated. Voice AI doesn't just change how companies communicate. It changes who is accountable for how they communicate. In a traditional organization, communication with clients is managed by people. Those people have managers. Those managers report to someone. There is a chain of accountability. When a client has a bad experience on the phone, you trace it back through that chain. When a voice agent handles the call, the accountability structure doesn't disappear, but it shifts. Now the agent is the communication layer, and the people accountable for the agent's behavior are not the ones who used to manage the phones. They're the ones who defined the agent's logic. The people who designed the decision trees, wrote the prompts, set the escalation thresholds. In most companies, those people sit in a technology function, not a client-facing one. That is a structural shift, and most executives haven't fully processed what it means. It means that the quality of client communication, which used to be a human resources and management question, is now partly an engineering question. It means that a product decision made by a developer can change how a client feels about the brand. It means that the traditional separation between operations and technology is no longer clean. I've worked with organizations where this created real tension. The operations team felt they'd lost control of something that belonged to them. The technology team didn't fully understand what they'd taken on, and leadership hadn't defined clearly who owned the outcome. That is not an AI problem. That is an organizational design problem that AI made visible. The deeper issue, and this is the part that takes time to surface, is that voice AI forces a rethink of what executive presence is actually made of. For most of the 20th century, and well into this one, presence was physical. It was embodied. It was the leader who walked the floor, took the important calls, set the tone through direct interaction. Even as organizations scaled, the assumption was that leadership presence flowed through people, through managers trained to carry the values of the organization into every client interaction. Voice AI breaks that chain, not because it removes people, but because it inserts a layer that operates continuously, at scale, without fatigue, and that layer now carries the organization's identity, whether leadership intended it to or not. The question that most companies haven't asked is, do we actually know what identity we want that layer to carry? In the sectors I work in, insurance, healthcare, accounting, the answer is almost always incomplete. Not because leadership doesn't care, but because identity, at the level of individual client interactions, was never fully articulated. It was assumed to live in the people, and now it has to live somewhere else. The companies that navigate this well are not the ones with the most advanced technology. They're the ones that use the process of deploying voice AI as a forcing function. They use it to articulate, explicitly, what their communication values are. What tone, what escalation behavior, what the agent should never do, and what it should always prioritize. That articulation, that process of writing down what was previously assumed, is organizational work. It's hard, it's slow, and it produces something valuable. A clear, deployable definition of what the company sounds like and why. The companies that skip that work deploy faster, and then they spend months correcting for the absence of it. There's a second-order effect worth naming here. When voice AI handles the routine layer of client communication well, it doesn't eliminate the need for human presence. It concentrates on it. The calls that reach a human are no longer the ones that could have been automated. They're the ones that required escalation, the complex ones, the sensitive ones, the ones where judgment and relationship actually matter. That changes what it means to be a client-facing employee. The bar shifts, the expectation shifts. People who were handling high volumes of routine calls are now expected to handle lower volumes of genuinely difficult ones. Some organizations have prepared for that transition. Most haven't. The ones that haven't tend to see a dip in client satisfaction after deployment, not because the AI performed badly, but because the human layer wasn't ready for the calls it started receiving. That is the second-order effect. The one that doesn't show up in the deployment plan. The one that matters more than the technology. Executive presence, in the age of voice AI, is no longer just about how leaders show up. It's about what they've built to represent them when they're not in the room. That's always been true, in some sense, but voice AI makes it literal and measurable. The organizations that understand this early are not the ones chasing the newest models or the most natural-sounding voices. They're the ones asking harder questions about identity, accountability, and organizational readiness. Technology is not the bottleneck. It never is. I'd be curious where you are in this process. If your organization is deploying voice AI or planning to, what's the conversation that hasn't happened yet? If you want to explore what this actually looks like in practice for your business, your structure, your clients, you can book a call with me directly. A link is right below this video.